Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. In this episode, Sam and myself got to sit down with Edward Ashton. Edward was a lot of fun, and I bet you he's having a great couple of weeks because Mickey 17 is now in the theaters based on his book, Mickey 7. The book is fantastic, and the movie's pretty good too. So if you haven't checked it out, the book or the film, go and do that. Check the show notes for a link to Edward's website and more information on his books. He was a lot of fun, and we'll definitely have him on the show again in the future. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
Joining us on the bridge this episode is Edward Ashton. Edward is the author of Mickey 7, which has recently been adapted for the big screen under the title Mickey 17, directed by none other than Bong Joon-ho of Parasite fame and starring Robert Pattinson, among others. Edward has authored several books, and I imagine many of our listeners are already familiar with Antimatter Blues, the sequel to Mickey 7, perhaps also The Fourth Consort, Mal Goes to War, and 3 Days in April. His short stories have also appeared on Escape Pod, If You Know, You Know, Analog Magazine, and Fireside Fiction. Edward, I know this is a busy time for you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Hey, so I'd like to jump in with Mickey 7, which tells the story of space colonist Mickey Barnes, aka Mickey 7, who is a disposable member of a new colony on an alien world. Mickey is an expendable, so he undertakes the most dangerous jobs to help ensure the success of a fledgling colony. And when one Mickey dies, another is cloned in his place with most of his memories intact. And he's then available for the next dangerous mission. This is a story that's pretty dark, but also funny. Can you talk a bit about your inspiration for this?
Yeah, the seed of this book, like the seed of many of my stories, was an image. I start a lot of my work that way. In this particular case, this was an image of a man trapped at the bottom of a crevasse. He's injured. He's freezing. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he was doing there. I didn't know if this was on Earth or someplace else. But that image was stuck in my head, and I wrote about 500 words. Just a short scene of his internal monologue, and then this is interesting, but he needs a friend, so I brought in Berto, and I gave them a conversation, and that turned into a couple of pages, 3 or 4 pages, and it just sort of grew from there. And eventually I needed a reason that Berto wasn't going to help him, and that's when I came up with the idea of the expendable. The idea that the name Mickey 7 was initially just his sort of his username, his internet handle. The 7 didn't mean anything until I came up with the idea of the expendable, and then I was like, oh, that's why it's Mickey 7. He's the 7th one. So I would like to think that there's actually some creative process going on somewhere in my medulla oblongata or something that I'm not aware of. And it's not just that I'm making stuff up as I go along, but that's sort of how this came to me. I thought I was writing a short story. I wrote about 5,000 words, which was basically the first chapter of what's the book now. It ended with Mickey being pushed out into the snow, out of the tunnel. And I thought, that's not really an ending. There's more to say here. And so I kept going, and it turned into a novella. It was about 25,000 words, a very dark, strange little novella. And I showed that to my agent, and he thought it was interesting. And he showed it to Nava Wolf, who was an editor with Penguin at the time. And she liked it, but she said, I really can't sell a novella. That's a really hard form to work with. I think you need to make this a novel. And 4 months later, I had the first draft of Mickey 7. And 25 days after that, Warner Brother had optioned it for film. So it's been a very, very strange journey.
I want to just kind of get back to this idea where you have this expendable, these colonists are out and they've got, we've got a dangerous job. Let's not use a drone. Let's use a person. Where do we justify the use of melting a human being, say in a reactor, over sending in a drone to make the fix.
Yes, I talk about that a little bit in the book, and there is, believe it or not, real justification for this. I don't know if you remember the Fukushima disaster in Japan a few years ago. They tried to send drones in to clean up the reactor there, and they died. The machines died after, 20, 30 seconds. As it turns out, microcircuits do not handle high radiation environments well at all. They tend to get broken down very quickly. Biological tissue doesn't like radiation so much either, but believe it or not, we can actually tolerate a high radiation environment for a longer period of time than a robot can. More to the point, in the environment where Mickey finds himself out completely isolated from the rest of humanity with no industrial base, it's a lot easier to make a new human than it is to build a new robot. And so the idea of the expendable is um, basically that there are things that a human can do better than a robot, that can endure longer than a robot, and a human's easier to replace than a robot. And so that's how he winds up having to do some of the awful things that he has to do.
It also raises the question then for the person who is undertaking the risky missions and being reborn. Uh, are they them? Is each iteration still the person they were born into being? You've in a couple of your interviews, you've spoken about the teletransport paradox, and the ship of Theseus paradox comes up as well. The two seem very closely aligned in this case.
Yeah, they are. So the teletransport paradox, for those who are not familiar, this is a philosophical question that goes back to about 1750. And it's simply stated is if you were able to transfer your mind into a duplicate of your body, would that be you or would that be a completely different individual? And I always think it's really interesting that they were able to come up with this question in 1750, which is something we puzzled over ever since. People like Ray Kurzweil, one of the chief scientists at Google, is currently very interested, obviously, in uploading his brain into a computer system, which he feels would be a form of immortality. And that raises the exact same question. Would that copy of his mind in that computer system really be an extension of him, or would it just be a computer that knows the access codes to his bank account, or is able to convincingly fool his wife into thinking that it's him when it calls. And then the ship of Theseus, of course, is a related question. It goes back even further. This goes back to Plutarch. So this is this is an idea that's almost 3,000 years old. The classic formulation of that is you have a ship that is sailing around the world, and as it goes, things break, and you have to replace them. And by the time you've circumnavigated the world, after years and years, you return to port, and there's not a single spar or line on the entire ship, which was the same as when it set out. Is that the same ship or is it a different ship? And that question is the central question of Mickey's life, because that's exactly what happens to him. He is, not replaced piece by piece. He's replaced all at once. But he wakes in his bed after each regeneration and he feels like himself. He has all the same memories. He believes that he's himself, but he knows that he's died and he doesn't know for certain if he really is the same person who laid down in that bed the night before.
It sounds like the themes came after you started to write. I mean, you were just telling us that you wrote a scene. Is that a writing style of yours then to say, you know what, I've got a vision. I'm going to just start with that vision and I'm going to find and I'm going to connect what the story is going to mean afterwards?
That is 100% the way that I write. And that bothers some people to hear. That bothers me sometimes when I'm in the middle of it. I find my way through my novels like a man finding his way along a foggy road in the nighttime. And I have to trust that somewhere, like I said, somewhere deep down in my subconscious, this has all been worked out and it's going to come out where I need it to be. And I always have a sort of a dark night of the soul, and it usually comes around 40 or 50,000 words. into a book where I'm not sure that I'm really getting where I need to get. And, am I going to hit a dead end and I'm going to wind up having to throw this away and start over? And, so far my brain's always come through for me, and I'm very grateful for it doing that. But it's a leap of faith every time that I start a new work. I wish that I could plot out my entire book, start to finish, and then just fill in the pieces. I know people who work that way, who have a detailed outline before they get started, and they know exactly what every chapter is going to be and exactly how the denouement is going to be at the end of the book. Um, I just can't work. I've tried. I can't work that way. Nothing comes to me when I sit down and just try to think out what's the plot of this book going to be. Everything that I try to come up with just sounds dumb or cliched. And so I just have to trust the process, and I start writing. And like I said, so far it's always come to me.
I take some comfort in that process. I need most of life just to be recognized that way. When I see someone who can sort of plot out and chart out virtually anything and strategize in that way, I just it just makes me uncomfortable because I don't operate that way at all. So
I think it's more that a lot of the work is getting done under the surface. I mean, I think a lot of the work is getting done in my subconscious. Things come to me a lot of times in the mornings, or when I spend a lot of time in the woods. I live in the middle of the forest. I spend a lot of time in the woods walking my dogs, and I'll be out there with my wife sometimes, and she'll be talking, and then she'll stop. She'll just stop talking, and she'll turn and look at me and say, "You just finished a chapter, didn't you?" It's like, yeah, yeah. She's like, "I could tell you were tuned out. You didn't hear a single word I said for the last 10 minutes." And I knew exactly where your brain was why I didn't bother you, but you're done now, right? You just figured out how this chapter ends. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. We can talk again. So, the work's getting done. It's just not getting done in that sort of very organized, structured, here's my outline, here's my synopsis way that some people seem to work.
one of the other things I wanted to touch upon is the issue of colonizing space. So in the book and in the world that you've built here, uh, you know, they're colonizing space in a manner not dissimilar to how we colonized Earth. Right there seems to be very little concern about indigenous life, and is more of a kind of private industrialized concern. Uh, and with the rise of private space enterprise, are there risks that override the potential rewards? We've discussed this on the show in the past. Like, and my sense has always been that the farther you are away from accountability or just a HR department, the more room you have for pretty bad behavior. And there you have the idea that you have an employee that you can kill repeatedly. And what are your thoughts on what space exploration might look like, the corporatization of space, and where we might be headed in terms of that?
I mean, there's where we might be headed, where I hope we're headed, and where I fear that we're headed, right? These are several different things. As far as colonization goes within our solar system, certainly, I don't actually think there's much of a future for that. There's a lot of talk being thrown around right now about, oh, the billionaires are planning to escape to Mars. There's because we've ruined the Earth, right? We've ruined the Earth, so they're going to escape to Mars. There is absolutely nothing that we could do to this Earth that would make it worse than Mars. Nothing. A full-scale nuclear war, we could unleash every single warhead we have on this planet, rain destruction down on everything, and it would still be a much nicer place to live than Mars. It is an absolutely toxic environment. No oxygen, no liquid water, sleeting radiation. You'd have to stay buried underground. The dust is absolutely carcinogenic and toxic. There's no motivation to go to a place like that. If we found another planet that was similar to this one, that was Earth-like, you could talk about that, but that's obviously not in this solar system. And we currently don't have even eyes on a technology that would allow us to reach another star. So, for right now, colonization is kind of a dead letter. It's something for fiction. It's not something for us to worry about at this time, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's something we discuss a lot, but every time we're discussing it, usually we do have the advantage of like a faster than light drive at our disposal, right? So yeah, you're right. We're not even close to touching anything like that at this point.
Now, I will say there's no faster than light travel in my books, in my universe. I'm not breaching the laws of physics in that way. So everything that happens in Mickey's world happens with respect to the laws of light speed, which makes things difficult. That's why it's a 9-year journey to get where they're going.
And you teach physics, right? Is that
I need to be careful about that. I teach a lecture series once a my profession. I'm a cancer researcher. That's what I do. Um, I teach a series on magnetic resonance physics every year for my old advisor, my old PhD advisor, because we're friends, and he doesn't like to teach that section, and so I do it for him every year. So I'm not a professor. I'm not a tenured professor or anything like that. My wife, who is a tenured professor, always likes me to emphasize that because she wants to make sure that everyone knows that I am not on that level.
Can you tell? Is it sorry? The what you are teaching? It's quantum physics related, though.
I teach the physics behind magnetic resonance imaging, which all occurs in quantum space. If you want to spend the next 3 hours listening to me drone on, I could explain to you exactly how these systems work, but I'll suffice to say, MRI, there are 3 Nobel Prizes associated with them, all well deserved, in my opinion. MRI is, in my opinion, the single most impressive technological achievement that we have as a species at this point. It's an unbelievably complex system that makes use entirely of quantum effects. So if you don't understand quantum physics, you don't understand the block equation, you can't understand how an MRI system works. And so that's what I try to drill into these students' heads. They mostly um, are not that interested in hearing it, but I do my best.
And have you incorporated this into any of your stories? Have you taken this technology into the future, 50 years or 100 years, or?
Um, there's bits and pieces of the medical stuff that I do in Mickey Seven and some of my other books. But the fact is, physics is not that interesting. Real science is not that interesting, and I'm not. I don't write to educate people. I write to entertain. So where the science comes in for me, my actual scientific background, is in making sure I don't say something stupid. There's nothing for me when I'm reading science fiction and I come across something where the author clearly just didn't understand the fixed science, the settled science around a particular topic. That just completely yanks me out of the story. So I try to make sure that I never say anything like that. I try to make sure I never write anything that someone who really knows their stuff would look at and say, this person's an idiot. That's where my scientific background comes into it for me. I'm not trying to teach anybody any physics in my books. That's, like I said, that's boring. Nobody wants to hear that.
well, both Mickey books are totally entertaining, and so I think mission accomplished there. And
Thank
in
you.
fact, let's it's soon to be well is now released in theaters as Mickey 17. You mentioned earlier, and directed by Boon Jong Ho, and really what a great get for a director. Uh, can you tell us about what that process is? You said it happened pretty quick, 25 days, and you're talking to the studio already.
Yeah, I cannot express to you how bizarre this entire process was. This is not at all how this is supposed to go. But I turned in the final draft of the book to my agent in December of 2019, and by the middle of January 2020, Warner Brothers had optioned the property for film, and like that's not how that's supposed to work. You're supposed to get the book published, it becomes a bestseller, then the studio gets interested, and then you get a movie. But that, for whatever reason, I don't know how my agent did it. He got Brad Pitt's production company interested in the book. Dee Dee Gardner, Jeremy Kleiner, and Brad Pitt have a production company called Plan B. Uh, they were interested. They thought it would be a good fit for director Bong, who they had worked with previously on Okja. So they optioned it. They sent it off to Bong, and and again, it's just bizarre coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. Bong, after Parasite, had been working on another project, which was sort of a true crime, a dramatization of a true crime story that had occurred in the UK. And he had, right around that time frame, come to the conclusion, after interviewing some of the people who had actually been involved in the true part of the true crime, that it would be immoral to move forward with this project because too many people had been hurt too badly, and he was trying to make basically entertainment out of it, and it wasn't right. And he had a sort of a dark night of the soul of his own, and like realized he had to set this project aside. And just at that time, my book showed up on his desk, and something in it sparked with him. And I think after having spent a fair amount of time with him now and had a number of conversations with him, I think he and I share a lot of worldview. I think we share the same sort of dark sense of humor, and I think some of that resonated with him, and he decided this is the project he wanted to do. And I had a couple of weeks ago, I had breakfast with Doo Ho Choi, who's his long-term collaborator. He runs Kate Street Productions, which is another production company that works with him. And he told me, look, I have to tell you, Ed, when he said this is a project he wanted to do, we all kind of looked at him and said, "Are you sure? Are you sure you really want to do this?" But he was adamant, and about 3 or 4 months later, he had signed onto the project. He brought in Robert Pattinson, and things really just snowballed from there.
And so we've had dozens of authors on the show who have had their stories adapted. And just to call it a few, because the road is very different for you. It's really interesting. Andy Weir, self-published,
Hmm.
and you just you get going, and the popularity grows, and then soon someone picks it up, and it seems like a slow game. Hugh Howey, same thing, self-published. And what a great story, and what a great guy. I really appreciate the work that he does and how much he does on his own. And then that's just, it's a slow game that they're playing to get to that film. Um, and I don't want to speculate too much on how this happened, but it almost seems like there would be studios, or maybe Plan B themselves, is saying, hey, we're looking for a story about clones. Hey, we're looking for a story in space or an action. Because I am kind of blown away with how quickly that happened. And I mean, your agent sounds pretty amazing. Um,
He is. He really
yeah,
is.
so are you baffled still? Are you, because I obviously it's probably a bit surreal for you, but are you baffled by how it happened, or do you know that they were looking for something and you were there at the right time?
I mean, there was definitely serendipity. On an intellectual level, I understand the process. On an emotional level, I still have not ruled out the possibility that I'm actually in an intensive care unit right now, hooked up to a heavy morphine drip. Like I said, it's just in particular, you have to understand where I was in my career at this time, right? So I published my first book with HarperCollins in 2015. It sold about 10,000 copies, which is pretty good for a debut, science fiction debut. It was all right. 10,000 copies in the first year. That got me a second contract, which was the book you didn't mention in the intro, called The End of Ordinary, which nobody mentions. There's a reason nobody mentions it, because that book did not sell. We sold about 400 copies in the first year of
And
that
is
book.
this with the same agent, by the way?
Yeah. Yeah. We've been together for 11 years now. And so, 400 copies sold in the first year, that is a mill wheel around your neck as an author. And my third book, which still has never and will never be published, my agent could not sell for love or money, because you go to a publisher, the first thing they do is look at the book scan numbers from your last book. And like, nobody bought that one. Why would anyone buy this one? And he absolutely couldn't sell it. And so we had kind of a tough conversation where he's like, maybe have you thought about changing your name, maybe moving to Patagonia, becoming a sheep farmer or something? Maybe that'll work out better for you. And like, okay, I took that. but I said, look, I've got this other project that I've been working on. I'm gonna finish it. And that was Mickey Seven. That project was Mickey Seven. And and so we went very quickly from like maybe I'm never going to sell another book to like Warner Brothers has optioned your film, and this book has now been translated into 24 different languages, and we're a bestseller in Korea, and on and on and on. I mean, the transition there was so abrupt from really an almost extinction level. That second novel, The End of Ordinary, was almost an extinction level event for my literary career. And then to turn around from that to a, a film being made of your book by probably the most famous director in the world at the time, with one of the most famous actors in the world starring in it, it's just implausible. It's completely, completely implausible.
Now, what was the adaptation process like? Were you involved in that, and was it hard to share? You're kind of handing over, your work and allowing a village to sort of work with it. Like, is that hard? Or you just have to release ownership?
So what you're saying was it difficult for me as an obscure author to allow Bong Joon-ho to adapt my book to be good? No, that was not very hard. I had a very easy time with that. Um, Honestly, if it had been someone else, and I don't want to insult anyone by naming some director that I would find terrifying, but imagine, like some sort of like B movie type director, like the guy from Plan 9 from Outer Space or something.
Yeah.
If somebody like that had been on the project, yeah, I probably would have been very nervous about that. But this is Bong Joon-ho, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had occasional nightmares that I would be remembered as the man who destroyed Bong Joon-ho's career. I never thought he'd be the man who destroyed mine. That thought never ever crossed my mind. And in terms of the adaptation process itself, he was much more collaborative with me than he needed to be or than I had any right to expect. We had Zoom calls, we had some long conversations about the book. He was really curious about my vision for the book and what I thought the themes were, and he went so far as to ask me what I thought the heart of the book was, and to promise that he would include that in his movie, which I've seen the movie now, and he did. He kept his word, and I'm extremely grateful to him for that. It was not something he in any way was obligated to do. He did it as a kindness to me, and I will never forget that.
So, in terms of the adaptation and maybe things that have changed, I believe that you're able to talk about things a little bit more.
Mhm.
So, let's just point out that the film is called Mickey 17. So that means that we needed 10 more Mickeys to kill, which probably was just more entertaining and more fun. That's my guess. It would be fun to kill 10 more. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe even just the 10 more and maybe some other changes that we're going to see with the film without being too spoilery?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spoil anything. It's a fun movie, and I want everybody to be able to enjoy it. But you could probably guess just from the title. Yeah, Director Bong wanted to do just a fun death montage, and you can't really get that. You've seen some of that in the trailers, just sort of fast hitting death, 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 death. And seven wasn't enough for that, so he needed 17, which is totally fine. He felt I was insufficiently murderous, and I'm willing to accept that. Um, there's some other changes. Again, you probably noticed from the trailer that Commander Marshall has a wife in the film, which
Tony Collette, right?
yes, which he did not in the book. She's really just a delightful character. I wish I had written her into the book because she is a ton of fun in the movie. He changed some of the names, I think, to maybe better match the ethnicities of the actors that he got to play roles. So he's got Stephen Yoon playing Birdo's role, um, and he changed his name to Timo, I think, to sort of match more with his appearance.
Mhm.
Kat Chen becomes Kai Katz because he has the actor that he has portraying her is not Asian. but that, those are really minor changes. The roles are pretty similar. He also certainly takes a lot of shades of gray that I have in the book and makes them a little more vivid black and white. I think they're more the good characters are really good and the bad characters are really bad kind of thing, whereas everybody's sort of in the mushy middle in the book. And I think that's something you almost have to do on the screen. I think in a book where you have 350 pages to talk things out, you can be a lot more sort of muddled about the morality of characters, and on the screen things have to be more vivid and kinetic, and he certainly adapted things in that way.
A really strong cast. Yeah, like Steve Yeun from Walking Dead fame,
Mhm.
and we got the Hulk. We got yeah, it's just an all-star lineup. Did you have an opportunity to meet anyone? We've got to ask about the star sightings. Is this
I yeah, I briefly met Robert Pattinson when we were on set for the filming. We met Holiday Granger while we were there as well. We got to see everybody at the after party after the premiere, so that was fun. I actually spent most of my time at the after party hanging around with Robert Pattinson's sisters and his mom, who are just absolutely delightful people, by the way. Really, really friendly, super, super helpful. It was interesting seeing the actors in their sort of natural environment, not on the screen. So if you look at Naomi Ackie, um, up on the screen, she has this just commanding presence. In this film in particular, she plays Nasha, so she's sort of this badass combat pilot who's in control of every situation. And they, like you see her at the after party, and she looks like one of my kids. I mean, you can see, okay, she's just a 20 something person, doing her thing. And it was interesting to see them humanized in that way to me.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, it's got to be a completely surreal experience.
Very much so.
The film is very well received. The reviews are fantastic. This is it's a hit. It's well loved already. Has there been any talk about Antimatter Blues?
Not to me. I would love that. Obviously, I would love to see. I feel like Animated Blues is a really fun book. I think it's a nice follow-on to Mickey Seven. Now, some of the things that Director Bong did with the plot um, make it a little less compatible with the story that I laid out in Animated Blues. I think those are all things that could be overcome potentially. But more to the point, I don't think Director Bong is the sort of person who does sequels. He just doesn't.
Right.
Now, Warner might want to do sequels if things go really well. And in that case, I'm sure that's a discussion my agent would love to have, and I would love to collaborate with something like that.
And even just for future books that you plan on writing, you now are able to not write for the screen, but kind of see that a little bit more because now you're on other people's radar. Because I know Andy Weir talked about this a little bit, and I'm not sure if he wanted more creative control in his new one that's not out yet, Project Hail Mary. But he was offered to come on as a producer to maintain a little bit more of that creative control. Is that something that interests you, kind of getting involved in film, or is that something you're like, nope, I'm here to write books, you do the film thing?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in knowing what you're good at, knowing what you know, and doing what you do, and trusting professionals to do what they do. I work as a scientific researcher. I work in a team environment. I work with other researchers, with MDs and other scientists. We all have our specialties. We all know what we do, and we trust one another to do the right thing. I would like to take the same sort of approach here, and I think we did with this film. And if I, God willing, get an opportunity to have another one of my works adapted, I think I would take the same approach. I'm not going to try to tell you how to make a movie. That's not what I do. I think I'm pretty good at writing books at this point. I would not ever try to write a script because that's not something that I have. I haven't read 1,000 scripts the way I've read 1,000 books. I don't have an intuitive feel for how they're structured, and I don't have an intuitive feel for how movies ought to be put together. So I'm not going to try to intrude in that business.
a perfectly reasonable approach? As this starts to pass, what's next? What can your fans look forward to in terms of your next work, your next book, or whatever?
Well, my newest book came out on February 25th. That was the Fourth Consort. So
Mhm.
that's hopefully everybody will take a look at that. It's I really feel, don't tell Director Bong, but I feel like this is my best work to date. It's a fun story. It takes on what's sort of a trope in science fiction of the idea that there's a sort of benevolent galactic civilization out there of like many species working together for the betterment of all life, and they've reached out to us, and humanity's been invited to join. And then the twist is, well, except what if the group that's invited us to join actually is basically a criminal gang? And there really is a galactic civilization out there, and they hate us, and they hate the group that signed us on. And we basically become foot soldiers for the mafia, and the real benevolent society is kind of out to get us. And that's the situation that the protagonist of my new book sort of finds himself in. Uh, he is signed on as a sort of a diplomat to make first contact with uncontacted species on new planets, for the purposes actually of plunder, basically. And he's on a mission. He's making contact when the representatives of the real benevolent galactic civilization show up. There's a giant firefight in the skies over the planet. Both of the ships are destroyed, and he finds himself stranded on this planet with a representative of a foot soldier, a shock troop from the real benevolent galactic civilization himself, and the natives, who are sort of these large predatory insectoid things that have their own problems. They're actually in the middle of a brewing civil war. And so he winds up getting stuck in the middle of their politics, not understanding at all what's going on, not understanding their society, not understanding their culture. He has a glitchy translator that sometimes can get the words right that he's hearing from these other people and sometimes not. And he's trying to find his way through and secure this planet for his employers against those of the representative of the other organization, all while trying not to get killed by any of the several people who are creatures who are trying to kill him at any given time. So it's a romp. It's a fun story, and it's also explores some philosophical questions about honor and morality, and sort of who gets the respect of being a person, and in what circumstances is it justifiable to throw morality aside in order to defend your own life?
And so I get the sense that the dark humor continues
Oh,
with
very much
this.
so. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very much
Eh,
so.
And so this is the Fourth Consort. Has this been optioned?
No, no. This one, like I said,
It's
this
still out there.
around out there. Yeah. My most recent book, Mao Goes to War, the one that came out before this, that has been optioned by Warner
Okay.
Brothers.
But not the Fourth Consort. Okay.
Fourth Consort.
I'll shoot Spielberg an email and see if we can get that moving.
Oh, please do. Yeah, I appreciate that.
We'll get that going. Thank you for joining us on Tales from the Bridge today. Thank you, Edward, for joining us. Remember to check out past episodes if you haven't listened to them all yet. We've got some good ones there, and we've definitely got more to come in the future. Until next time.